She asked about my fading love. I revealed the truth she feared. The question that hung in the air. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, each second amplifying the silence that had settled between them like morning fog. Nadia Salim sat curled on the sofa, her fingers gripping a now cold cup of tea, watching her husband Tariq stare at his laptop screen with hollow eyes. This had become their routine, existing in the same space while living in different worlds. 3 months. That's how long she'd been noticing the shift. The way his kisses landed on her forehead had become perfunctory, lacking the lingering warmth they once held. His laughter, once freely given, now seemed rationed. Even their conversations had become transactional, grocery lists, bill payments, schedule coordination, stripped of the playful banter that used to make mundane moments sparkle. Nadia had tried convincing herself it was temporary stress. His new position at the architecture firm demanded longer hours. She'd been occupied with her teaching career and her mother's health issues. Life had simply become busier. But tonight, watching him mechanically scroll through documents without really seeing them, she couldn't ignore the growing chasm anymore. "Tariq," she said softly, her voice cracking the silence like thin ice. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers with a politeness that hurt more than anger would have. "Yes." She set down her teacup, her hands trembling slightly. "Do you still love me?" The question hung between them, raw and vulnerable. She watched his jaw tighten, saw him close his laptop with deliberate slowness. He didn't answer immediately, and in that hesitation, Nadia felt her heart constrict. "I need to know," she whispered, tears threatening. "Because it feels like you're slipping away from me. Like I'm losing you even though you're sitting right here." Tariq leaned back, exhaling a breath that seemed to carry years of weight. His silence stretched longer, and Nadia realized with growing dread that whatever truth he was about to reveal would change everything. The confession of the unseen. Tariq's eyes drifted to the window, watching the city lights blur through the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "I do love you, Nadia. That's what makes this so hard to say." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression she'd never witnessed before, exhaustion mixed with resignation. "My love hasn't faded. It's been suffocating." Nadia's breath caught. "What do you mean?" He stood, pacing the length of their living room, running his hand through his hair. "Do you remember when I took that lower-paying job 3 years ago so we could move closer to your mother? I never complained because I knew how much you worried about her living alone." She nodded, confused where this was leading. "Or when I spent 6 months renovating this apartment, coming home exhausted from work only to paint walls and fix plumbing until midnight, because you said you wanted it to feel like home." His voice remained steady, but she heard the tremor beneath. "Or the countless dinner parties I've helped host for your colleagues, the weekends I've sacrificed my hobbies to support your projects, the times I've listened to you talk for hours about your students while my own day went unasked about." Nadia felt her face flush. I didn't realize." "I'm not asking for gratitude," Tariq interrupted gently. "I did those things because I love you. But Nadia, when was the last time you asked how I was feeling? Really asked, and waited for an answer? When did you last notice that I was struggling, tired, or needed support?" The words struck her like physical blows. She wanted to protest, to defend herself, but memories flooded back. Tariq mentioning his difficult project at work while she scrolled through her phone, him suggesting they spend a quiet weekend together while she made plans with friends, his attempts at affection met with her distracted responses about her own concerns. "I've felt invisible in my own marriage," he continued, his voice cracking now. "Like I'm a supporting character in your life story, valued for what I provide but not for who I am. The love didn't die, Nadia. It just ran out of places to go when it wasn't being received." She stood, moving toward him, but he held up his hand. "I need you to understand this isn't about one moment or one mistake. It's been years of feeling like my presence is assumed, my efforts expected, my emotions irrelevant unless they directly affect your comfort." Tears finally escaped his eyes. "I've been drowning in loneliness while sleeping next to the woman I love." The weight of realization. Nadia couldn't sleep that night. She lay beside Tariq, listening to his breathing, feeling the space between them like an ocean. His words replayed in her mind with brutal clarity, each memory he'd mentioned illuminating others she'd forgotten, or worse, never noticed. At 3 in the morning, she slipped out of bed and found herself standing before the bookshelf in their study. Her fingers traced the spines until she found what she was looking for, a leather journal Tariq had given her on their wedding day, alongside one he'd kept himself. She'd written in hers religiously for the first 2 years of marriage, then sporadically, then not at all. She pulled both journals down and settled into the reading chair, her hands shaking as she opened Tariq's first. The early entries made her smile through tears, his excitement about their future, his detailed observations about her quirks and habits, his gratitude for small moments they'd shared. But as she progressed through the years, the tone shifted. Nadia seemed distracted during dinner again. I told her about the promotion opportunity in Karachi, but she was checking her email. I don't think she heard me. I withdrew my application. I couldn't imagine moving without her full support, but I also couldn't bear to bring it up again. Her chest tightened. She vaguely remembered that conversation, remembered nodding along, but she couldn't recall a single detail he'd shared. Another entry, 2 years later, spent the weekend helping set up her classroom for the new term. She was so happy with how it turned out. I mentioned I'd been feeling overwhelmed with a new project at work, hoping we could talk about it. She kissed my cheek and said, "You always handle everything so well." I suppose that's true. I do handle it. Alone. Nadia pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Page after page revealed a man who had slowly, quietly diminished his own needs to make space for hers. Not because she demanded it, but because she'd simply stopped seeing him clearly enough to notice. She opened her own journal, reading her entries about their life together. They were full of her feelings, her challenges, her victories, with Tariq mentioned primarily as the steady backdrop to her narrative. Tariq helped me appeared frequently, but never I asked Tariq how he was feeling or Tariq needed support today. The journey back to each other. Morning light filtered through the curtains as Nadia heard Tariq stirring. She'd never returned to bed, still sitting with the journals spread around her like evidence of her own blindness. When he emerged from the bedroom, his eyes were puffy from crying, and when he saw her surrounded by their written history, something shifted in his expression, surprise mixed with cautious hope. "I read them," she whispered. "All of them. Tariq, I'm so sorry." He moved closer but didn't sit, as if uncertain whether comfort between them was still permitted. "I didn't write those for you to find. I wasn't trying to." "I know." She stood, closing the distance between them, her hands reaching for his face. "And that makes it worse. You weren't keeping score or building a case against me. You were just suffering in silence because I was too self-absorbed to notice." For the first time in months, Tariq leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as tears slipped down his cheeks. "I didn't know how to tell you without sounding ungrateful or demanding. I kept thinking I was being selfish for wanting more attention." "You weren't selfish. I was careless." Nadia pressed her forehead to his. "I took the most precious thing in my life and treated it like furniture, always there, never requiring maintenance. I forgot that love isn't something you achieve once and then ignore. It's something you tend to every single day." That afternoon, Nadia cancelled her plans. She turned off her phone, asked her mother's nurse to handle any non-emergencies, and turned to Tariq with a question she should have asked years ago: "What do you need from me today?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what would make you happy right now? Not what would help me, not what needs to be done for the house or our responsibilities. What does Tariq need?" He thought for a long moment, as if he'd forgotten how to consider his own desires. Finally, he said, "Do you remember Café Roshan? Where we used to go on Saturday mornings before we got married?" She nodded, remembering the small corner cafe with mismatched chairs and the best cardamom coffee in the city. They hadn't been there in years. "I'd like to go there. With you. And just talk. Like we used to." They walked to the cafe hand in hand, a gesture that felt both familiar and new. The place had barely changed. Same warm lighting, same aromatic spices in the air, same elderly owner who somehow remembered them and smiled knowingly as they entered. Sitting across from each other in a quiet corner, Nadia did something she hadn't done properly in years. She asked questions and then listened. Really listened. Not waiting for her turn to speak, not mentally planning her response, not checking her watch. She watched Tariq's face as he talked about his dreams for his architecture career, his fears about his aging parents, his desire to travel to places they'd only discussed hypothetically. "I always thought we'd go to Turkey," he said softly, stirring his coffee. "You mentioned it once on our honeymoon, and I've been researching Istanbul for 3 years. I even started saving separately for the trip, planning it as a surprise for our anniversary. But then I realized, would you even want to go? Would you make time for it, or would something more important come up?" The words stung because they were fair. "I would make time," Nadia said firmly. "Not because nothing else is important, but because you are. Because we are." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "I want to know about this trip you've been planning. Every detail. And I want to actually go, Tariq. With you. Fully present." As evening fell, they returned home different than when they'd left. In their bedroom, Nadia stood before Tariq, truly seeing him for the first time in too long. She noticed the silver threads in his hair she'd overlooked, the way his shoulders carried tension she'd never thought to massage away, the longing in his eyes that had been there all along, waiting for her to notice. She unbuttoned his shirt slowly, her fingers gentle against his skin, and whispered, "I see you now. I promise I see you." Their intimacy that night wasn't born from routine or obligation but from genuine reconnection. Every touch carried apology and promise, every kiss spoke of rediscovery. Nadia paid attention to every response, every subtle expression that showed her what brought him pleasure, what made him feel cherished. She'd forgotten how beautiful his smile was when it reached his eyes, how his hands trembled slightly when he held her face, how he whispered her name like a prayer when they moved together. Afterward, lying in tangled sheets with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady, Nadia made a vow. "This won't be a one-time fix. I'm going to show up for you, every day. Not perfectly, I'll probably still mess up, but consciously. I'll ask how you are and wait for real answers. I'll notice when you're struggling. I'll celebrate your victories. I'll make our marriage something you feel included in, not just something you support." Tariq's arms tightened around her. "And I'll tell you when I need something, instead of suffering in silence and expecting you to read my mind. We both have to do better." They fell asleep intertwined, closer than they'd been in years, both understanding that love wasn't something that simply existed. It was something they had to choose, actively and daily, if they wanted it to survive. Love rekindled through truth. The following weeks brought visible transformation. Nadia set boundaries at work, leaving school at reasonable hours and resisting the urge to grade papers during dinner. She implemented a rule: the first 30 minutes after they both arrived home were dedicated solely to checking in with each other, phones silenced, sitting together and genuinely connecting. Tariq, for his part, practiced vulnerability. When his father's health scare left him anxious, instead of handling it stoically alone, he came to Nadia and said simply, "I'm scared and I need you." Those 5 words, which once would have remained unspoken, opened a door to deeper intimacy. They established small rituals that honored both of them. Sunday mornings at Café Roshan became sacred again. Wednesday evenings were for cooking together, not as a chore but as a shared creative act, often ending with flower fights and laughter. They started a shared journal, passing it back and forth with daily notes, sometimes profound, sometimes silly, but always seen by the other. One evening, 3 months after their breakthrough conversation, Nadia came home to find Tariq had covered their dining table with maps, guidebooks, and printed itineraries. His eyes sparkled with an excitement she'd deeply missed. "What's all this?" she asked, though her heart already knew. "Istanbul. 3 weeks, next spring. I've already requested the time off from work. Your mother's nurse can stay with her, I already asked." He moved to her side, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We're going to get lost in the Grand Bazaar, watch the sunset from Galata Tower, take a boat ride on the Bosphorus. Everything I've been dreaming about. Everything we're going to do together." Nadia turned in his embrace, seeing in his face the man she'd fallen in love with, but deeper now, richer, earned rather than assumed. "Tell me everything you've planned. I want to hear every detail." They spent hours going through his research, Nadia asking questions, adding her own ideas, both of them building the trip together. Later, as they prepared for bed, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, smiling. "I was just thinking. I'm glad you asked that question. The one I was afraid to answer." He pulled her close, his hands settling at the small of her back. "It almost broke us, that honesty. But it also saved us." Nadia kissed him softly, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You gave me the truth I feared because you loved me enough to risk losing me rather than watch us slowly die together. That's the bravest thing you've ever done." Their lovemaking that night was different from their reconnect months before. This wasn't about repair or rediscovery, this was about celebration. About two people who'd walked to the edge of losing everything and chosen instead to fight for each other. Tariq's touches were confident again, his whispered endearments free of restraint. Nadia responded with equal passion, showing him through every caress that she was present, engaged, his. In the aftermath, wrapped in each other's arms, Tariq traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "You know what I realized," he murmured. "Love doesn't actually speak in grand gestures. It whispers in daily choices. And we almost missed it because we stopped listening." "But we're listening now," Nadia replied, kissing his chest. "And we'll keep listening. That's the promise." The next morning, as sunlight streamed through their window, Nadia woke before Tariq. She watched him sleep, noticing details she'd overlooked for too long, the peaceful expression on his face, so different from the tension he'd carried for years, the way his hand still reached for her even in sleep, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She thought about how close they'd come to losing this. How many couples probably suffered through the same slow erosion, never speaking the difficult truth, never asking the hard questions, simply accepting distance as inevitable rather than fighting to close it. Tariq stirred, his eyes opening to find her watching him. Instead of looking away or checking her phone as she might have done before, she smiled and said, "Good morning. I love you. And today, I want to know what I can do to make your day better." His answering smile was worth everything. Bright, genuine, full of the hope that love, when tended properly, never truly dies. It simply waits for us to remember that it needs more than memory to survive. It needs attention, intention, and the courage to speak uncomfortable truths before silence becomes permanent. They'd found their way back from the edge, not because the problem was easy, but because one person was brave enough to be honest and another was humble enough to listen. And in that space between fear and truth, their love was reborn, not as it was, but as something stronger, something they both now knew was worth fighting for every single day. Lessons from the truth between us. Love is not a destination but a daily journey. It requires constant nurturing, attention, and conscious effort, not just the memory of what once was. Silence in suffering destroys what vulnerability in truth can save. The most painful honesty is kinder than comfortable lies, for truth offers the chance to heal what silence would kill. To truly love someone is to see them, not as decoration in your life story, but as the co-author. When we reduce our partners to supporting roles, we lose the very connection that made us choose them. The bravest act of love is risking temporary pain for lasting healing. Speaking difficult truths may shake the foundation, but it also reveals whether that foundation is worth rebuilding stronger than before.